Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. Today we have a returning guest. He had so much information the first time we had to have him again. A lot of expertise in his area. So I'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Bill Slaughter, who is joining us today. He is going to talk to us about his visits to Gaza and his work there. Also a mental health conference he has attended, and the One Nation March, One People March. So we're going to go deeper dive into some of the issues he had mentioned earlier and talk more about his experiences and all these three different things that I just talked about. So thank you again for joining us today. And you know, when you first came, some of the stories, what you had shared about the children that you work with in terms of mental health. And I'm assuming this is anywhere in the world that you know, when a society or community has gone through such hardships of war and turmoil, that really the kids are really what suffer the most. If they are lucky to survive, then they suffer mental health issues and trauma. And I can't imagine how these kids are going to grow up to be what we consider a normal type of life, leading a normal type of life without having certain mental disabilities that are really reducing some of their quality of life. So I thank you for all your work. And I know you've done this for many years, and there's, I wish there were more like you that could share their experience, but I will let you get started on what you want to share with us today on. I know there's 3 different topics we're going to touch.
And Asima, I just want to thank you. You have such an excellent platform here. I think especially focusing on kind of perspectives and voices that aren't heard nearly enough with all the challenges we have with people trying to stoke things towards poor relations and that. So I really thank you as well.
Oh, no, thank you.
I had one quote that I liked that I thought I'd put it at the end, but I'm going to start with it instead from what you're saying. This is from an Aboriginal leader in Australia, Lilla Watson and her group there. If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is tied up with mine, let us work together. Wow. So, there's the whole issue of people who've been privileged to have training and so on and have travel and movement privilege, which a lot of people obviously don't. But really, especially now in the U.S. with people stoking social tensions and so on, there's such a connection between our social change here and hopefully getting along better with other parts of the world that it's really critical to just work together. Everybody contribute what they can, but realize we're learning all the time as well. I would like to talk a little bit about this is a trip from late last year. I usually get over to the area about once a year. Just one thing, I have real poor Arabic, so I am not able to work directly with kids, but I'm just working more with the staff that are doing training and a lot of learning as well. Okay. So, it's about mental health work there, and then what they call the Great March of Return, having to do with the people in Gaza trying to get out and go home, and then just some other short visits within Israel proper, people say, or 1948 Palestine. So anyway, my name is Bill Slaughter. My kind of background, my major I say is kind of cross-cultural health and wellness, psychology, medicine, community kind of work, and then minor, so to speak, is kind of political and international studies, Middle East Arabic studies and stuff like that. So the kind of synthesis or bridging kind of goes along with what we were saying a minute ago about working across people and so on. So that's a big factor. For some years, some of us have had a nonprofit in the U.S. that takes donations from here in Canada and passes on to colleagues who work in healthcare, mental health, and social services in that blockaded Gaza Strip area, about 2 million people there, in an area that's 90% kind of surrounded by the Israeli state currently, and then about 10% by the current Egyptian military government. Our main partner organization there is called Gaza Community Mental Health Program. I call it the backbone of mental health in the Gaza Strip. The first community mental health center in the Arab world, about 1990, 91, and has a pool of best trained and best experienced mental health workers in that besieged area, about 2 million people penned in there basically. Every few years, the mental health center there does a large conference as much as possible. We call it international. I've been involved with 3 of them, but it's really hard for people outside to get in. So occasionally some of us do get in, but it's mostly a gathering of people working in that field. I think of it as a gathering of the tribe of people in health and human services in Gaza Strip and their supporters. Several times we've had to have a telelink to the West Bank because of the movement restrictions. This time was real exciting. A group of psychologists who are Palestinians themselves, psychologists and psychiatrists, had established a telelink here at UMass Boston too. Mm-hmm. So led by Dr. Atala there. So trying to break the blockade and really work across peoples in that. This time there were about 600 people from in the Strip, so everywhere from grassroots and volunteer kind of organizations up to the biggest healthcare provider there is the United Nations, kind of cobbling together services as best they can with our current administration, withdrawing funding and things like that.
Right.
So a real big group there sharing information about their work. And Gaza's unfortunately a world center of experience regarding trauma and depression and anxiety, especially in kids and older people too. So people are sharing their kind of treatment techniques, some research that they do, and things like that. I did bring a couple slides. So if you would put up the first slide just for a couple seconds now. This has some pictures that just give a little bit of taste there. You can see a physician colleague there, Dr. Heba, in the lower left, lower right. She has over 100 patients a day. These are a conglomerate of pictures from Gaza Strip and Lebanon camps. At the most, I've had maybe over 30 patients a day in public clinics here in Boston and Massachusetts. She has up to 100 a day. So just, trying to serve people.
How do you do 100 a day? How much time can you possibly spend?
You don't have much time. Luckily, she has a team with her. Healthcare worldwide uses teams, but it's a real struggle. You can see some other pictures there, a supposed home with no furniture and a real paltry meal, but always great hosting there by people in the Middle East. And in the center, you can see the Al-Aqsa Mosque, so central to, kind of Muslim collective consciousness, Palestinian, and really a global symbol, I think. And then there's a picture of one of the Lebanese camps, a guard tower there. Many of the camps are surrounded by military and have access restrictions. There's kind of a thread through Palestinian experience of imprisonment, whether it's open-air prison in Gaza Strip or individual camps or with Israeli police and so on. But anyway, that's just a little bit of background. One way that I try to help Americans understand the area there, folks who haven't been able to get over there, is kind of comparing to the U.S. So I did a little math. I thought, I'm coming to see Asma in Worcester. So I looked on the internet, and the Gaza Strip's about, I'll say Worcester is about 1/3 the surface area of Worcester, and has about 10 times as many people in the Strip. So that means that the population density in the Strip is about 3 times that of Worcester. Okay. It's not the most densely populated place in the world, but it's one of the top few. So just imagine if your viewers, many of them are here in Worcester, thinking of what it would be like with 3 times as many people. Right. Very few people can enter or leave. Really constant attacks, big attack periods where thousands of people are killed, smaller ones where a few people are killed, things like that. And then you can't leave since 2006. Few people get in and out, but that's about it. So just a little quick comparison there to give that. And let's add in, 1/3 of people are in deep poverty. That means not even basic food, clothing, and housing needs met. Over 50% of people in some degree of poverty. And then, some people think about Palestine, Israel overall. That compares to just 6% in the West Bank. I just say that to just talk a little bit about how much more dire things are in this Gaza Strip area, and worsening every time I go there. So anyway, thanks for putting up the slide there. I wonder if you put the second one up just for a minute. This is a busy slide. I'll hold it up here in case the slide's still coming up. This just gives the scope in the area of 60 main refugee camps that have been around since the 1950s. and many other smaller places where people are. About 75% of all Palestinians are refugees of some sort or displaced. And I really thank the Palestinian Academy of Academic Society of International Affairs for the map there. So I just want to give some sense of that. Now, when you see that slide, there are proportional circles. And the biggest circles are camps of 100,000 or more, people. You see those scattered around. But in looking at that map, you can see that there are just many of those crammed into the Gaza Strip. So that's the biggest population of people just very crammed into an area there, giving so many problems there. 90% of water undrinkable, electricity allowed to happen just a few hours a day, which causes a lot of sleep and life disruptions and so on. Anyway, I know I'm talking a lot.
No. I'm just trying to absorb all the information you're saying. And as you're talking, I was just thinking, just this afternoon, I was told, listening to the news, that in Japan and Korea, they're very afraid of this virus, right? And people are being asked to stay in their homes for 30 days. And there was a reporter that was saying there's an epidemic of depression and anxiety for 30 days. And you're saying these camps and these open air prisons since 2006?
2006, and really for a lot of Palestinians since the 1950s in different ways, and just not being at home.
Right.
At this conference, some of the research was on depression, 40 to 50% of university students being depressed. In an area like that, there are just so many different kinds of distress studies you can do. Parents versus children, people with different physical disabilities, with diabetes, with amputations from shootings at the Great March and so on. So just a tremendous amount of information there. One of the most interesting things to me always is kind of cross-cultural aspects. Compare and contrast, how we, same and similar different humans. The kind of honor-focused society that's so prevalent in the Middle East, well known, had some real interesting research this time by Dr. Barber, longtime colleague out of Tennessee, New American Foundation, really looking at how deeply wounding humiliation kind of treatment is for people in Gaza and that whole region there. Another aspect of what really struck me in numbers this time was looking at coping mechanisms that people use. Number one, in one study at least, out of the Islamic University there, was religious coping. So doing salah, dua, just in general, and kind of positive viewpoint, that kind of thing. In the U.S. now, people interested in helping better the Israel-Palestine area, we have a lot of exposure to really great Palestinian groups and so on that come at things sometimes through a nationalist and legal perspective, which is really important. But sometimes we don't have as much exposure to the deep religiosity of many people there. So I just thought that was interesting that was particularly underlined. And another colleague, I think it was 6 of us out of 600 at the conference who were from outside the Strip able to get in. An Italian colleague, Dr. Veronese from Milano, was talking about how easy it is for folks in the global north, the old colonialist powers and neo-colonialists now, to not see, kind of the strong coping mechanisms just knit into fabric of society in the global south and so on. Although obviously that's really under stress in Gaza. But just those of us who've been in touch with them for a long time, kind of knowing these things very deeply. When I go there and train colleagues, sure, I bring what I know, but I'm learning a heck of a lot as well, and just knitting things together there across.
So you said something very interesting. You're saying that part of their coping mechanism is through religion.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that's missing more or less as a culture in this country, as a possible coping mechanism for depression?
Well, I think it can be. Yep. Now, I don't want to overstress religion in the Strip.
Right.
There's a real combination. Our primary colleagues there use a lot of professional studied kind of techniques, some medications and all that, but also are almost all Muslim themselves, a couple Christian colleagues, very integrated in the work there. So bringing kind of whole life perspectives like that, but really sorting out individually who's particularly observant and might really benefit from talking more with a sheikh, being observant in their prayer daily, who's not so much, and other techniques might help. So I do think in the US that can be quite important. I do think, though, there's been some morphing culturally a lot in the European tradition that's still dominant in the US, but things are changing, about kind of humanism that I think came out of some religious conditions. It's kind of a little different here.
Yeah.
But you and I have met through some some of the national Muslim groups that you've been helping lead. It is interesting to see in the U.S. just the uptick of Muslim communities here, mosque communities, really paying more attention now to mental health and really integrating again traditional Islamic psychotherapies and also just any kind of techniques that are working. So I think that's coming on a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's coming in the middle where they're coming towards more mental health, actual, like you said, the traditional way that we would think, and we need to possibly take some from them too.
Yeah. So, when there's a lot of things going worse in the world, I think there's a lot of exciting things too. Just the last slide, if you would, number 3, that is. While I was there, in addition to doing training and participating in what I've been talking about, I did have opportunity to go out in what they call Masira al-Auda al-Kubra, bad Arabic there, but the Great March of Return. If we're trying to keep some international law going, there's some dispute on that with kind of massive violations that unfortunately we U.S. taxpayers pay. All refugees have a right to go home. That's been particularly emphasized with Palestinians. They have what's called the right of return that was first promulgated by the UN, some years ago. And so people in the Strip, the point of that slide there is that it's a little difficult to reproduce. I'll say parenthetically, but this is by the excellent group called Visualizing Palestine that does a great amount of graphic work, so please look them up. I've blown up part of it here just to emphasize that you can see the Strip down there in the lower middle. At that time, there had been 95 Palestinians killed. There's over 300 now, but when this graphic resource was referenced. The point of this graphic is to show outside the Strip where people are from, where people are wanting to return to. I'd ask folks who are listening to consider getting out your phone GPS. Drill down, go over across the Atlantic to the Gaza Strip and drill down on that area. Around the Strip is green agricultural area. You can see the outlines of the Strip. When you go inside the Strip, it's just crammed full of people. A wonderful chap there, Ahmed Abaratima, from outside the Strip, who's only known the Strip in his whole life, was one time near the fence area and saw birds flying over. He thought, well, what about people? Wouldn't that be good? So that was kind of the impetus for the Great March of Return. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of killings there, and things have been put on hold because of the massive amount of casualties were so overwhelming to the very meager healthcare facilities that the Strip is able to have now. But I was able to go out there one of those Fridays. It happened to be the anniversary of the Balfour Decision, which was a British promulgation during World War I, promising special rights to Jewish people in that area. And so that was the particular focus of protesting that Friday. Beautiful sunny day, and at that time there were no violence going on then. That night, though, there was some. It was actually the first time I was in the Strip when there was active bombing going on. So I got a taste of that fear.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought I'd say a little bit then about, I am so privileged, we Americans are, to sometimes be able to move around the area in ways that people there are not able to. So I always spend a little bit of time in Israel proper. Some people say 1948 Palestine. What I do is, with so little time, check in with friends there, kind of give me a quick update on what good folks over there are doing. We're recording this now in February of 2020. There's just been the so-called Great deal of the century, some people say the steal of the century, that some viewers may be familiar with. It's trying to keep what they call a two-state solution over there. Look at the maps of that, and it's just not really two states. There's one kind of little islets, you can say, similar to South African Bantustans in the old apartheid days. So many people there are really just fully acknowledging, some of us have been for decades, that a single state of equality across peoples there, across ethnicities, where really everybody's safety and respect and equality can be honored and lived. How to do that. I checked in with two friends. One was one of the Arab leaders who does a lot of one-state work up in the north of Israel-Palestine, the Galilee area. What he's been doing is doing kind of joint presentations, especially in some of the Palestinian population centers. He told me one in the town of Sakhnin up in the north, where he and the Israeli Jewish historian, there's a chap named Ilan Pape, who wrote the seminal book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which was detailed documentation of 1940s takeover there, doing joint presentations together in the community and really laying out some of the history and questions of where do we want to go,
Right.
living together as Jewish and Palestinian people. I was able to check in with one of my Israeli Jewish friends as well, who's working on the same thing, different perspectives a little bit. At the last slide, I list the URLs of some of these groups, so I'll put that up just at the end. I was excited that what he's working on is a kind of group called the One State Foundation, which is trying to take donations and provide funding for people working on equality across ethnic lines to go out of the area and speak in Europe, maybe the US, and things like that. I was particularly excited there. There have been different strains of people working on one state. Some people coming at things through kind of a Palestinian nationalist narrative. On the Jewish side, some of the Jewish folks who are really oriented to equality and respect, spiritual aspects across people. Some people have really been focusing on what will the future political organizations and security mechanisms be, with everybody's safety a goal, not just one ethnicity there. So it's this One State Foundation was not trying to create a new thread within how do we go forward, but really support everybody who's working on equality across the peoples there. So I was real excited to see that as well. We're getting towards the end here. I'd like to just switch a little bit. We were talking before the recording started about, well, okay, what do we do in the US?
Yep.
Slide number 4, maybe just put up for a few seconds. That gives, kind of combines, this is one asima of the Join or Die revolutionary flag from the US that had the US segmented into several parts with the point of unity. Divide and conquer has been a very strong and to now effective strategy of subjugating Palestinian folks. So what I've done here is put the percentage of Palestinians who are in different areas. 20% on the West Bank, 15% still within 1948 Palestine, also known as Israel, 15% in the Gaza Strip, crammed in there. The biggest area the area in that Eastern Mediterranean that has most Palestinians waiting for their right to choose to go home if they want is Jordan. That's about a third of Palestinians. Wow. And as you know, about 45% of Jewish people worldwide have had that privilege to choose to go and live in the area. And so a question of when that'll happen there. So that's an example of trying to reach Americans. The fifth slide for folks in this area is about our New England Network for Justice in Palestine. I think we're up to about 25 affiliate groups here throughout the 6 states. I think we might be missing Rhode Island right now, but doing a lot of work, including quarterly info sharing meetings and local events and so on. So I'd really encourage folks who might be interested to get in touch. There's the URL there. And then at the last slide, I just put some of the contact information for some of the Gaza Community Mental Health and United Nations Healthcare and the One State kind of organizations there. I apologize to PASIA and Visualizing Palestine for not having put them on there yet, although I mentioned them. So that's a quick rundown of a trip over there. Sometimes I'm called, are you being a little naive? What we hear mostly on the news is the attacks on Gaza, all the
Right.
tension there, the tension around the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Western Wall, so critical for Jewish folks' spirituality, people who are observant. And it's true, there's no doubt about that. But it's also true that, the old adage of if it bleeds, it leads, so to speak, in newspaper publishing, there's a lot of good going on over there also. The way I see it is that, kind of the tinder, if you're a fire maker, the kindling, the embers are there of a real different future. But of course, the hatred and division, forces are there as well. We all have that within us to some extent. It's just a question of what do we feed?
Yep.
Goodness or kind of going on the dark side there. And if the massive amount of money, about $4 billion a year now, that we in the U.S. give to the control, surveillance, and armed repression kind of structures over there, just went over to the other side. The people working together across ethnic lines, the healthcare folks kind of work with kids so there
Right.
won't be ongoing generations of trauma. If we could shift that, then it'll be a different world.
Right.
So.
I know we have probably 1 minute. I do have one question to ask
Sure.
you. I know there was a study, and I know this might not be enough time to answer it completely, so you may have to come back. But there was a study with the Holocaust survivors, and their lineage, that the ones who did survive, who had children and were able to prosper with their families. There was a study saying that you do carry some trauma from your family members. Now, if Gaza has been through so much, and these kids are growing up, and there are kids growing up in trauma, and even if we resolve the situation somehow, how do you solve the trauma that you're carrying from your ancestors?
Big question. You keep working on it, and each individual has to, figure out exactly for them. There's so much to learn from the Holocaust. I work in Boston. I have a number of people I've worked with who are probably second, third, maybe fourth generation out, Holocaust survivors. And we talk about that. How is it still in me in a way? In what ways am I shaped by some of the family stories? If I identify as Jewish, how's that affecting me now in different ways? I think that's critical. No one has one answer. There's one school of counseling that says, step one, stop badness from happening. Yeah. We've got to do that, and then really wade into how to acknowledge so much of the badness that's been happening and bring that out. Some people need more supports. There are other people who do relatively well, but it basically needs focus, move away from the bombings and towards processing things like that.
Right. Thank you so much. We don't have a lot of time left, but as usual, when we have you come on our show, a lot of things to think about, and you really make us really proud to be Americans and really cherish the fact that we're able to move around our country, live in a way that you cannot imagine other people don't have those same rights. I hope you enjoyed our show today. A lot of information to reflect on, and if you want to do more, we're going to share the links on this particular, before we sign off, we'll share the links that you had on one of your slides. And I hope you join us again, and thank you again for everyone joining us today.